Hello friends, we've been considering dislocation as the defects that is primarily responsible for the plastic deformation. Now, we saw that dislocations can be categorized into edge and screw dislocation depending on the change in the atomic arrangements that they bring about to the regular arrangement of the atoms in the crystalline material. Now, in the regular appearance, or when you impose a plastic deformation to a material, this plastic deformation, it rarely is introduced in the form of a pure edge dislocation or a pure screw dislocation. Moreover, these dislocations that are being introduced, they do not terminate within the grain. They interact with the grain boundary, or they interact with the surface, thereby leading to the formation of the surface strip, which we saw in the previous lectures, or they form or appear in the form of a dislocation loop. So there are two characteristic features when you want to talk about the dislocation in the physical condition. So in the physical condition, the dislocations are rarely pure. So what we mean by that is they do not form exclusively as an edge dislocation, or they do not form exclusively as a screw dislocation. Secondly, these dislocations, they do not terminate within the grain, so thereby they form a loop, or they interact, or to put it simply, they terminate at the grain boundary or at the surface. The interaction of the termination at the grain boundary and at the surface, they render different results. In case of the surface, they lead to the formation of surface step. And we saw in the previous lecture, the magnitude of the surface step is equal to that of the Berger vector when the dislocation is of a pure kind, a pure edge or a pure screw dislocation. Now at the end of the previous lecture, we considered a section of a dislocation loop which is neither pure edge or neither pure screw dislocation. So we are moving towards a physical consideration. In the previous lecture, we considered a section of a dislocation loop that is commonly observed in a physical material, or physically observed. So this here, the line in the red, it represents the dislocation line, and this dislocation line is a form of, or is a part of a segment of an overall dislocation loop. In order to understand the nature of this dislocation loop, we consider its Berger's vector at different point. So when you consider at this point A, now here the Berger's vector of this dislocation loop at the point A is perpendicular to the dislocation line. So only at the point A, the Berger's vector B is perpendicular to the dislocation line. So that means at point A, it is a pure edge dislocation. Now when you consider point B, the Berger's vector, so at point B, the Berger's vector is parallel to that of the dislocation line, So what you essentially have is, at point B, you have pure screw dislocation. Now between the points A and B, so between the points A and B, if you have a point that is between A and B, then you have a mixed dislocation. It's not a pure dislocation, it's a mixed dislocation. That is a combination of edge and screw dislocation. So between A and B, you have a combination of edge and screw dislocation, and at point A you have pure edge dislocation, and point B you have pure screw dislocation. So theta at point A is equal to 90 degrees, wherein the theta is the angle between the Burgers vector and the dislocation line. So at A it is 90 degrees, at point B it is 0 degrees. So between point A and B, so the mixed dislocation in the mixed dislocation, the theta is not equal to 90 degrees or 0 degrees. So this is what characterizes the theta when it is the angle between the Burgers vector and the dislocation line. The mixed dislocation is characterized by theta not equal to 90 and 0 degrees. Now in that case, how can we understand how much of a edge dislocation is present and how much of a screw dislocation is present? That is what our aim is. We have a mixed dislocation, and we know that it is a mixed dislocation by considering the angles between the Burgers vector and the dislocation line. When the angle between the Burgers vector and the dislocation line is neither 90 degrees or 0 degrees, we know it's a mixed dislocation. Now we want to know how much of a edge dislocation is present in that mixed dislocation, and how much of a screw dislocation is present in that mixed dislocation. For that, we consider a dislocation line and the angle made by the mixed dislocation. So we consider the dislocation line AXY and the angle made by the Burgers vector B. So the Burgers vector B is between the points A and B. So this Burgers vector is at a point that is between A and B. So it is a combination of edge and screw dislocation. This makes an angle theta with the dislocation line. So edge XY is the dislocation line. We are considering a section of the dislocation line. Now in this we can construct two other vectors. One vector that is perpendicular to the dislocation line, and the other vector that is parallel to the dislocation line. So one vector that is perpendicular to the dislocation line is nothing but the Burgers vector of the edge dislocation. So if OA, it represents OA vector, it is perpendicular to the dislocation line. So this is nothing but the Burgers vector of the edge dislocation that is present in the overall mixed dislocation. So we are considering the Burgers vector of the overall mixed dislocation along with the dislocation line, and we are constructing a vector that is perpendicular to the edge, the dislocation line. And now this vector, since it is perpendicular to the dislocation line, we consider it as the Burgers vector of the edge dislocation. And similarly, let us have a point. So this is OA. So A should be here, and let us have a point B. So AB vector is parallel to the dislocation line XY. So this can be treated as Burgers vector for the screw dislocation. So what we have essentially done is, by considering the Burgers vector for at a given point between A and B along with the dislocation line, we have constructed two additional vectors that is perpendicular to the dislocation line and parallel to the dislocation line. The perpendicular vector we refer to as the Burgers vector of the edge dislocation, and the Burgers vector, the vector that is parallel to the dislocation line, we refer to as the Burgers vector of the screw dislocation. Now these two vectors are the part of the original mixed vector B vector. So this is what we want to know, how much of the Burgers vector, the mixed vector, comprises of the edge dislocation and how much it comprises of the screw dislocation. So the mixed vector is the combination of the edge dislocation and the screw dislocation. Now these are just theoretical considerations. We want to now add to the magnitude, how much, we want to quantify how much the edge dislocation is present and the screw dislocation is present. Now we have theta here. This OA vector is perpendicular to XY. So this angle is 90 minus theta. Now we can project this Burgers vector, that is the Burgers vector for the mixed dislocation, onto the vector OA. So that means the vector OA is nothing but B vector cos 90 minus theta. So that means the OA vector is B vector sine theta, and OA vector is nothing but, as we have seen here, the component of the edge dislocation that is present in the mixed dislocation. Now similarly, we can consider the AB vector, and in case of the AB vector, since it is parallel to the dislocation line, the component of it can be represented as B vector cos theta, and this is nothing but the component of the screw dislocation that is present in the combined dislocation. So therefore, we have the amount of edge dislocation that is present in the combined dislocation can be expressed as the magnitude of the combined dislocation vector along with the sine of the theta, that the theta is the angle the Berger vector makes with the dislocation line. And similarly, the amount of screw dislocation that is present in the combined dislocation can be represented or can be calculated by this expression here. So what we have understood is, when the theta, the angle between the Berger's vector and the dislocation line, when it is not equal to 0 or 90 degrees, you have a combination of edge and screw dislocation. Now, by considering the section of the dislocation and the dislocation line and its corresponding Berger's vector, we can construct two more vectors that are perpendicular and parallel to the dislocation line, and based on the angles the Berger's vector makes with the dislocation line, you can calculate, by taking the sine theta and the cos theta, you can calculate the amount of edge dislocation and the amount of screw dislocation that is present in a particular point of a mixed dislocation. So when you have a mixed dislocation, a dislocation loop of mixed dislocations, by considering a specific point, by constructing a Berger's vector and considering its dislocation line, you will be able to dissociate the amount of edge vector that is present, or edge dislocation that is present, and the amount of screw dislocation that is present. So now you can assess the dislocation loop and consider a specific point, calculate a Berger's vector, and then identify how much of the edge dislocation is present and how much of the screw dislocation is present. Now let us move on to consider the energy of a dislocation. Now let us move on to consider the energy of dislocation. The reason we need to consider this particular aspect of the dislocation is because when we represent a positive dislocation in this manner, so this is the representation of the positive dislocation, or rather more specifically positive edge dislocation. So for the sake of our argument, to make it more simpler, let us assume or confine to a positive edge dislocation. So this is the way we represent it. So this line here, it denotes the extra row of atoms. If you could recollect, this line here, it represents the extra row of atoms, and this line here, it represents the plane in which the dislocation line is present. And if you could recollect, this plane we referred to as in the previous lecture as the slip plane, when we rendered a three-dimensional consideration of how a dislocation would propagate in a three-dimensional system, instead of considering different lattices or different combinations of unit self and atomic positions. When we talked about the propagation of dislocation in a three-dimensional system, when we distinguish dislocation as the region or the line that separates slipped region and the unslipped region, the plane in which the dislocation line propagates, we refer to it as the slip plane. So this here represents the extra row of atoms and the slip plane. Now when you visualize, when you recollect how this extra slip plane is arranged in the regular arrangement of the atoms, or how this extra slip plane is placed in the regular arrangement of the atoms, you would see there are atoms surrounding this extra layer of atoms, and here this extra layer of atoms in this region, it experiences a compressive stress. So in addition to the existing arrangement of the atoms, you include or introduce an additional layer of atoms. So this layer of atoms experiences a compressive stress. When compared to this compressive stress here, if you could recollect, we saw there is a distortion that is being observed in this region below this slip plane. If you consider the arrangement of the atoms, you can see that in this below the slip plane there is a distortion, and when compared to this compressive stress that is being introduced by this extra layer of atoms, or the extra layer of atoms experiences compressive stress in this region, what you would observe is a tensile stress. So below the slip plane, what you would observe is the tensile stress. So what we essentially have, by introducing an extra layer of atoms in the regular arrangement of the atoms, the extra layer of atoms above the slip plane experiences a compressive stress. However, below the slip plane, the distortion that we talk about, it is of a tensile nature. So that means the overall energy of the system, it increases with the dislocation. So unlike vacancies, which do not increase the energy of the system, it is a stable impurity, the dislocation, it increases the energy of the system. A simpler case is what we have seen here. We have an extra layer of atom experiencing compressive stress, that means a load is acting, that means an energy is introduced, and similarly below the slip plane you have the tensile stress that is acting. So tensile stress, more accurately if you talk about this, should be below this slip plane here. So below the slip plane, the tensile stress is acting and compressive stress is acting above the slip plane. So what you essentially have is, even in case of the pure edge dislocation, you have an increase in the energy of the system due to the introduction of the dislocation. Now we need to, or it is possible for us to quantify, at least representatively, the increase in the energy of the system due to the introduction of the dislocation. Even though we don't want to quantify or arrive at a specific expression, we can see what are the parameters that govern this increase in the energy of the system. Now, this understanding the parameters that govern the increase in the energy of the system will help us understand the path in which the dislocation propagates, because the dislocation should not propagate in a path wherein there is a ever increasing or continual increase in the energy of the system. So therefore, the propagation of the dislocation should be in the path wherein this increase is rather minimal. So therefore, in order to understand in which path does the dislocation propagates, we need to understand the energy that is introduced by the dislocation. So in that way, we can choose a path, or we can understand why the dislocation chooses this particular path, because in that particular path, even though there is an increase in energy, this energy is minimal. In all the other paths, this energy will be considerably more. So for that, we need to understand the energy introduced by the dislocation. Now, even though the dislocation, it introduces plastic deformation into the system, we confine or we calculate the energy introduced by the dislocation in the framework of elastic theory. Let me repeat, even though the dislocation brings about the plastic deformation into the material, while calculating the energy introduced by the dislocation, we stick to the plastic theory, because once this dislocation moves away from this particular position, the atomic energy or the atomic arrangement of the atom, it resumes back to its original position. So whatever change these arrangement of the atoms have experienced, it is for a moment, and once the dislocation has passed, it gets back to the normal position. So this is something similar to that of the elastic deformation, and therefore we stick to the elastic theory in order to calculate the energy introduced by the dislocation. Now, in the elastic theory, the energy introduced by any strain, so we have a combination of strain and a stress that is bringing about or that is increasing the energy of the system. So we saw that you have a compressive stress that is acting above the slip plane and a tensile stress that is acting below the slip plane. So when you have a stress, you have a corresponding strain to it. Now, the elastic energy, or the energy that is introduced by this combination of stress and strain. So just to recollect and put it all in terms of the energy even in the simplest positive edge dislocation, you have a combination of compressive stress and the tensile stress. Compressive stress experienced by the extra layer of atoms above the slip plane, tensile stress below it, that is the distortion that is caused below the slip plane. Now, when you have a combination of stresses, these stresses bring about a strain, and in these conditions, based on or in the context of the elastic theory, the strain energy that is brought about by the combination of stresses and the associated strain is expressed as the strain energy in the elastic theory that is brought about by the combination of stress and strain is expressed as 1 by 2. Rather, you have some summation terms here like now this is the stress and this is the strain. Now we have the product of stress and strain, and the half of it will give you for a given or a particular section of the material will give you the overall energy change in that particular section. So half of the product of stress and strain in a particular section of the material will give you the overall energy change in that material according to the elastic theory, and this is the strain energy that is we are talking about. Now this notation I and J is because if you could recollect, the stress is not a scalar value. We have different components of the stresses. In a three-dimensional system, when you impose a mechanical condition, the stress that is experienced within the material can be dissociated into different components. The overall or the first part or all the previous lectures before the dislocation module dealt largely with this. If you want an expression for it, this will be of this manner. So sigma xx, sigma rather after the sigma xx, which is the normal stress, we have the shear stress component, so it will be sigma xy, sigma yz, sigma yx, yy, sigma yz, rather zx, zy, sigma zz. So your sigma terms, they represent the normal stress, and your tau terms, they represent the tau terms here, they represent the shear components of the stress. Now once you have dissociated the different components of the stress, it is possible for us to identify with the help of several moduli that we have. We have Young's modulus, we have bulk modulus, we have shear modulus, and along with the Poisson's ratio. So this is Young's, bulk, shear, and Poisson's ratio. So in combination of all these material constants, once you are able to dissociate the applied strengths into different components, you will be able to identify specific components of strain. So that is what, and that is why we have the notations Ij here. So once you are able to dissociate the associated stress into different components, you can calculate the respective strain from the material constants that are being involved, and correspondingly the different strains can be expressed in this manner. So it will be xx, xy, sigma xz, and here you will be having the strain. The diagonal elements will be the strain along the particular direction, and these others will be the shear strain. So since it is possible for us to dissociate the stress into different components, we need to also dissociate the stress, or rather the strain, the resulting strain, into different components, and in the elastic theories, these constants, they allow us to do this, they enable us to do that. So that is what these individual terms mean in the context of the overall energy. So the change in the energy that is introduced by the dislocation. So each dislocation, it introduces a specific stress along the different direction, both normal and the shear components of stress, and there is an associated strain that is comes along with this, which can be calculated by the material parameters, and the combination of these two will give you an expression for the overall chain that is introduced into the system. So this here is the stress that is introduced by the dislocation, and the corresponding strain is here. So this stress, we are dissociating it to different components in the different directions. So we are dissociating it into normal and shear stress in different direction and shear stress in the different direction, and based on the material parameters we are calculating the corresponding strain, taking the product of it, and then we ultimately calculate the overall strain, that is, or strain energy that is introduced by the dislocation in the material. However, even though theoretically it is possible for us to calculate, or it is possible for us to dissociate the stress easily, or so far what we have been considering is the dissociation of the stress, these derivations were based on the imposed stress. So whenever we dissociated a given stress into different components, these stress were based on, the principal stress was based on the imposed stress. Now in case of the dislocation, we are talking about the stress that is introduced by the extra layer of atoms. So it is highly difficult for us to calculate the stress that is introduced by the extra layer of atoms. So therefore, in order to calculate the strain energy of the dislocation, we begin by considering the strain introduced by the dislocation. So let me repeat. In the previous cases, when we dissociated the different components of stress, this we did because our principal stress was the one that we imposed. So we knew what was the stress that we imposed, and based on that we were able to dissociate the different components of stress. However, now in the context of identifying the strain energy introduced by the dislocation, it is very difficult for us to calculate the different components of stress that is introduced by the extra layer of atoms. Therefore, we begin by considering the strain that is introduced by the extra layer of atoms. So this strain is calculated based on the displacement that is introduced in the atoms. To calculate the strain, we calculate, or we consider the displacement that is introduced in the atoms. So since it is easier for us to calculate the strain around the dislocation, we do that by considering the displacement of the atoms. So similar to the strain, which has a direction dependency which varies with the direction, the displacement or the calculation of the displacement also varies. So in case of the normal strain, wherein something like this, the expression for the dislocation, or the expression based on the displacement, it is of this form: the displacement along the x direction. And similarly for y, you have the displacement along the y direction with respect to the y, and the strain along the z direction is the amount of displacement the atom has exhibited along the z direction. Now comes the shear strain. So this shear strain, rather, for xy, it is expressed as 1 by 2 the displacement along the x direction with respect to y, and the displacement along the y direction with respect to x. So since we are adding these two, this epsilon xy is also equal to epsilon yx. Now similarly, you would have an expression for the epsilon yz as the displacement along the y direction with respect to z, and displacement along the x direction with respect to y, and this will be equal to zy. Now finally, epsilon, rather zx, will be equal to epsilon xz, and 1 by 2 of a combination of these terms can be introduced here. So now what we have done is we have calculated the different components of strain. So we have calculated the 9 components of strain by considering the displacement exhibited by the atoms in different directions. Now based on these 9 components of strain, we can subsequently calculate the 9 components of stresses. So from the 9 components of strain, we can calculate the 9 components of stresses through these different material parameters. Through those different material parameters, we can calculate the 9 components of stresses, since we have calculated the 9 components of strain. Now this is why we are talking, it is important that we consider all these derivation in the context of the elastic theory, because only in the elastic theory it is possible for us to do that. Secondly, we assume the material to be isotropic, or else for different x direction and y direction we need to consider different constants. So we assume the elastic theory for the isotropic material, and despite this assumption, it has been identified that whatever results or whatever expressions that we get is qualitatively rather holds true even for the experimental consideration. So even though we talk in terms of the elastic theory, even though we talk in terms of isotropic material, whenever you compare this theoretical derivation to that of the experimental observation, they are, even though not precisely equal, or they do not agree precisely, there is a qualitative agreement. The general term trend, there is an agreement in the general trend. So we stick with this derivation. So what we have essentially done is, since it is difficult for us to identify the stress surrounding the dislocation, we began by considering the different strains surrounding the dislocation, and based on the different strain we have now calculated the different stresses, and now it is possible for us to calculate the overall or the strain energy introduced by the dislocation. Now what essentially we have done is, this strain energy, which was initially dependent on the strain, now it is dependent on the displacement of the atoms. So initially the strain energy, when you consider the expression that is based on the elastic theory, it was dependent on the strain. Now since we have calculated the strain based on the displacement of the atoms, now it is dependent on the displacement. Now the displacement of the atoms during a dislocation. In a dislocation, the displacement of the atom, we have already seen how we can quantify it. So when you introduce a dislocation, particularly a pure dislocation, edge or screw dislocation, it is possible for us to calculate how much the dislocation, how much the atoms have moved because of this dislocation. Now in the initial stages of this lecture, we also saw, even when you have a combination of dislocation, it is possible for us to know how much the atoms have moved. So this we do it through the Burgers vector. So the magnitude of the Burgers vector talks about how much the atoms have moved because of this, of a particular dislocation. So we have seen how we can calculate the Burgers vector for the edge dislocation. We have seen what is the nature of the dislocation for the Burgers vector for the edge dislocation. We have seen what is the nature of the Burgers vector for the screw dislocation, and magnitude of this Burgers vector, it gives you the amount of displacement experienced by the atoms in a particular dislocation. And in the we saw in the early stages of the lecture, that we can also calculate the Burgers vector for the combination of edge and screw dislocation. So the Burgers vector tells us how much of a displacement atoms experience when you introduce any form of a dislocation, be it pure edge, pure screw, or the combination of dislocation. So ultimately what we mean is, this change in the energy or increase in the energy due to the introduction of the dislocation is proportional to the magnitude of the Burgers vector of the dislocation that is being introduced. So therefore, when you solve for the different expression, and when you arrive at make some assumption and make a simplification, we don't want to get into all of this derivation. So when you calculate these different components of strain based on the Burgers vector, and calculate the appropriate stresses and introduce them into this expression and integrate it for the overall volume, when you do all those, when you carry out the overall derivation, introduce this Burgers vector, translate it into the displacement, from the displacement calculate the strain, from the strain calculate the stress, and then put it into the overall expression for the strain energy and integrate it for the overall volume. When you do all that and make some simplification, you arrived at a relation that the increase in the overall energy of the system because of the dislocation, the strain energy increase because of the introduction of the dislocation, is proportional to the square. That is proportional to the square of the magnitude of the corresponding Burgers vector. So the actual relation is of the form alpha, or rather alpha g b square. So the B here is the magnitude of the Burgers vector of the dislocations that are involved. Now G is the shear modulus, and alpha is the proportionality constant. So what we essentially have, or what we are interested is that the increase in the overall energy of the system because of the introduction of the dislocation is proportional to the square of the Burgers vector that is being associated with the dislocation. So that means when the Burgers vector associated with the dislocation is high, the overall change in the energy of the system correspondingly increases. Particularly, you should note that it is the square of the Burgers vector. So there is a significant increase when the Burgers vector increase in the dislocation. So there is a significant increase in the energy of the system when the Burgers vector is increased. So like we saw earlier, the reason we need to consider the overall energy of the system or increase in the energy of the system is because the dislocation movement or the propagation of the dislocation should ensure that even though there is an increase in the energy of the system, it should be minimal. It should not be comparatively higher. So therefore, we have seen that this increase in the energy of the system because of the introduction of the dislocation is dependent on the square of the Burgers vector of the dislocation. So therefore, the propagation of the dislocation should be along a particular path wherein the Burgers vector is minimal. So only when the Burgers vector is kept minimal, we will be able to ensure that the overall change in the energy because of this introduction of the dislocation and also the propagation of the dislocation is minimal. So the Burgers vector, the path the dislocation takes for the propagation, dislocation takes for its movement should ensure that there is a minimal change in the energy. This is ensured by the specific choice of a plane and a specific choice of the direction. So therefore, in order to ensure that there is a minimal change in the overall energy, the dislocation chooses a specific plane and a specific direction to propagate. So there is a specific plane and a specific direction the dislocation chooses so that the minimal change in the energy is maintained. So this specific plane is called as slip plane and this specific direction is called as slip direction. So the dislocation, it propagates along a particular plane and along a particular direction in that plane, and this is referred to as the slip plane and slip direction. So this choice of the slip plane and slip direction is because in that plane and in that direction the Burgers vector, the magnitude of the Burgers vector is minimal. So therefore the dislocation chooses this particular path, and this combination of plane and direction is what is referred to as the slip system. So what is slip system? The slip system is a combination of plane and direction which the dislocation chooses to propagate. The reason it chooses to propagate in that particular plane and direction because the Burgers vector is minimal, so that means the overall energy change that is introduced into the material because of the propagation of the dislocation is also minimal. Now, so that means we can then identify based on the crystal structure which plane would be a slip plane and which plane would be the slip direction. So since in the slip plane and the direction the Burgers vector should be minimal, we can say just by considering the crystal structure we can say which is a slip plane and which is the slip direction. So therefore when you consider a crystal structure, the slip plane is the one wherein you have highest density of atoms, and the slip direction is the one wherein you have shortest lattice translation vector. So when you know what the crystal structure of the material is in which the dislocation is introduced, you will be able to identify in which slip plane and in slip direction will the dislocation will propagate by considering the atomic or the density of atoms in different planes and the shortest lattice translation vector. So lattice translation vector, if you could recollect, is the Burgers vector that is equivalent to that of the interatomic spacing. When the interatomic spacing is the shortest, in that direction the dislocation will propagate, because when you have the interatomic spacing that is shortest, then you would ensure the minimal magnitude of the Burgers vector. So the slip plane and direction, they combinedly ensure the minimal magnitude of the Burgers vector. So that means the slip system that is operational for a crystal structure can be identified by considering the highest density of atoms in a given plane and the direction wherein you have the shortest lattice translation vector or the shortest distance between the atoms. So highest density of atoms, the plane should be densely packed, and the direction should be, or in the direction the atoms should be close to each other. So in this path alone, the dislocation will propagate, because this path is the minimal energy path. So the dislocation chooses a particular slip system because it is a minimal energy path. So therefore, even though there is an increase in the overall energy of the system because of the introduction of the dislocation chooses the slip system in order to maintain the energy change to its minimal. Now, what we have essentially done is, we have talked about the different form or different types of the dislocation, or rather a more convoluted dislocation, which is the combination of edge and screw dislocation. And we have seen that with the introduction of the dislocation, there is an increase in the energy of the system. Now this energy of the system is proportional to the displacement of the atoms that has been brought about by the dislocation, and therefore we have related that displacement to the Burgers vector. And the dislocation path will be the one wherein the Burgers vector is minimal. So even though there is an increase in the energy due to the introduction of the dislocation, the movement will ensure that the energy change is minimal. Now, supposing in a three-dimensional plane, you are introducing a load or imposing a tensile load P, and you want to calculate the stress that is required for the propagation of the dislocation. Now, the dislocation, as we have seen, it chooses a particular, or it propagates in a particular plane along a particular direction. So it means that there is a specific plane in which the dislocation will propagate, and not only a specific plane but also a specific direction the dislocation will propagate. So that means we can quantify in a three-dimensional plane the slip system, or we can characterize in a three-dimensional system the slip plane and direction. So in a three-dimensional system, depending on the crystal structure of the system, we can characterize the slip plane and the slip direction. So if this is your loading direction, P is your load and this is your loading direction, so based on the loading direction, you can characterize the slip plane and the slip direction. So this, based on this loading direction, the slip plane is inclined by an angle theta. So it is not always necessary that the slip plane, it is perpendicular to the loading direction, because the slip plane is now dependent on the crystal structure. So that is what we have seen earlier. So this slip plane, if inclined, it is, we can calculate the inclination by plotting or by dropping a perpendicular, and this perpendicular is the normal here, and the angle theta is that normal of the slip plane makes with the loading direction. And now, in addition to the slip plane, we know the slip direction as well. So this could be your, let's assume that the red line is the slip direction along which the dislocation is going to propagate, and this angle between the loading direction and the slip direction, let us assume it to be lambda. Now we want to calculate how much stress that is available for us to allow or that contributes to the propagation of the dislocation. So we have seen that the dislocation will propagate in a specific path. Now we want to talk about the force or the stress that allows or that enables the propagation of the dislocation. Now this term or the loading P can be converted into stress by taking the ratio of the cross-sectional area of the three-dimensional material that we have considered. So we have considered a three-dimensional rod. By calculating or by considering its area or taking the ratio of the load and the area of cross-section of the three-dimensional cylinder, we can calculate the stress that is imposed on the material. Now this stress we need to dissociate or we need to consider this component of the stress along the plane and along the direction in order to talk about the effective stress that is available for the dislocations to move. So we know the stress that is imposed on the cylindrical system, and we need to dissociate the stress into particular plane and a particular direction in order to understand how much of this effective stress is available for the dislocation to propagate. This we will continue in the next lecture, wherein we will see how much of this actual stress or the imposed stress is available for the movement of the dislocations. So we will see ourselves in the next lecture. Goodbye.